Jake Sisko dreams about a sloping floor. Jake Sisko has a calculus test in the morning, and Altrina vomited all over the table. Can you believe it? Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Seventh Rule with Cirroc Lofton.
Hello.
My name is Ryan T. Husk, and today we're doing a review of Deep Space Nine, Season 2, Episode 9, Second Sight. Story by our good pal, Mark O'Connell, and teleplay by Mark O'Connell, Ira Stephen Bear, and Robert Hewitt Wolf, all good friends of the show. This was November 21st, 1993. Where were you? What's up, Cirroc? How are you?
1993. I'm good. I'm really good. What a fun episode for me to kind of go back in the time machine and watch.
Totally. It's like a double time machine. So everybody at home, we never actually watched and reviewed this episode because our good friends, Melissa Longo, Kat R. King, and Heather Jordan reviewed this episode for us 3 short but long years ago. And so for Cirroc, it's a time machine of like 29 years ago. But for both of us, it's also kind of a time machine of 3 years ago because it's like all our old buddies. You were a baby in this episode.
Yeah, which is funny because that mirrors the kind of the doubleness of this character that's in this episode, having 2 of this character. But it's been a long time. I was really pleasantly surprised by the opening scene. I really liked it. I thought it was a good father moment, father-son moment. I liked the energy that was there between Sisko and Jake, and him consoling him for that bad dream. I really enjoyed that moment. I thought it was special, and it reminded me of the journey that we took to go through so many different things. There's a line there where he says, oh, so you've been talking to Nog about women again?
Yeah.
And I just thought, oh yeah, that's how how Jake and Nog started and all of that. And it was just so good to see those moments, and obviously the adolescents being young. And I remember kind of having those type of conversations, with your parents and stuff when you're going that age. So it was good.
Yeah, it was a NAM for Nog, everybody, a non-appearance mention for Nog, so we can check that one out. That very opening scene, there were 2 things that hit me. The first was just when I first pushed play and you see the exterior of Deep Space Nine with the ship docked, and I actually audibly said, yay, because I was like, oh my God, there's one more episode that I get to see. I was just like, wow, This is so cool.
Yeah.
And it's so cool for some reason that it's an old one. I don't know. It made it feel so much more special that it was an old one. And I knew it was going to have the old theme song, which in a way I kind of liked better. It's just more beautiful and sad and melancholy and hopeful. But then right after that, it jumps into a father-son scene with Jake and Benjamin. And I was like, how the hell did we almost let this one slip through our fingers? You know what I mean? Like we almost didn't review it. And now it feels so precious to me that wow, we almost let this one slip away. And we have basically like bonus material between Jake and Captain Sisko on top of this bonus episode. It was a really special moment for me. I loved it.
Yeah, and I have to agree with the fact that, having now watched this series and knowing, how things progress, it was a real special treat at going back to this moment in time before things started to get really crazy and everything starts to really hit the fan. I felt like, oh, this is the time in the ship when everybody was feeling each other out, getting to know each other. There was a lot of growth in this early development.
Kira was still rough around the edges.
Yeah. And I love that.
Odo looked a little different. O'Brien had some kind of different haircut. He looked young. It was weird.
He did. And Odo did look a little bit different to me.
Yeah, he did.
So I did feel a sense of the early beginnings of DS9 and kind of it. This felt like a time period when it was not as dramatic as it ends up becoming towards the later seasons with all the war stuff. You could just feel a chill in the air. All the station's kind of melancholy. It's a relaxation type of moment. There wasn't really a sense of uh, urgency or desperation. It was very a nice, evenly kind of relaxed. This is a day a day in the life of Deep Space Nine type of feel to it. So I really enjoyed that as well.
The innocence of youth.
Yeah.
Like the series was only 2 years old, barely 2 years old, just like Jake Sisko.
And then you start to see things in a different way. So like as I'm looking at this character, Fenna,
yeah,
I'm comparing her to Cassidy, right? So I'm looking at her, I'm like, would she have made it better? So I'm thinking, how would that have worked out? And then I'm thinking, no, I think Cassidy has, the total package for what Sisko needs.
Definitely a different character type. You're right. Like I'm finna compare the two for just a moment here.
Yeah. You finna do that?
It feels like, and I didn't even make that connection, but that's really good thinking there. Like Cassidy, when we look at Cassidy, now maybe this might just be that she was in 15 or 20 episodes, so she was much more fleshed out, but there was more of a vulnerability to her. There was more obviously depth, but you get that with way more episodes. Whereas this lady Fenna, and Sisko does kind of mention it. He's like, you always say the perfect thing. She was almost like somebody's wish or somebody's dream because she was perfect. And Cassidy was far from perfect and totally owned it. She was like, no, this is who I am. This is what you get. Take it or leave it. And I'm going to flash an adorable smile and walk away and let you think about it.
Yeah. Cassidy definitely had more pizzazz and kind of a spunk to her attitude. She would have that little talk back and her, don't mess with me, don't play with my stuff, and I do what I do. I'm an independent person, so there was a lot of that to who she was, and I think that matches well with Sisko's character. I think that's the kind of person that he would need to keep him interested, and so it makes sense to me that he would be more with a Cassidy type of personality. But clearly he was physically attracted because obviously
you know what else too? Now that you mention that, they were the right person for that time in his life, right? When he met Cassie, what was it? Probably season 4, maybe season 5. He was stronger. He had more growth. He had more healing. He was older. When he met this lady Fenna, what did he just say? He just remembered that it was the 4-year anniversary of his wife's death. So he was feeling sad. He was feeling weak. He was feeling vulnerable. Maybe he couldn't handle back sass. Maybe he couldn't handle someone strong and independent and sassy. Maybe he just, he still had this wound in him. And at this point in his life, he just wanted somebody that said the perfect things every time and made him feel good and said that she loved him within like 5 minutes of meeting him practically. Where I was like, whoa, dude, there are a few whoa moments, but that's, when we're hurt and we're vulnerable and we're trying to heal, a lot of times that's what we need. We need like, this love bombing or like, something like that, more so than when we're strong and we're ready to take on the world again. Then we can handle somebody that is of a like mind like that.
Yeah, and the other thing I thought about while I was watching this episode was when you are a single parent and you are possibly interested in seeing people and building a relationship with another person, that is a big moment for the child, right? Because if you start dating somebody that's not that person's mother or something to that degree, then it could be a psychological kind of, it's going to have an impact on that child, right? Especially if it gets serious and you start, becoming a family essentially. That's where you have these step situations, stepfather, this and that. But one of the big things that's a hurdle or an obstacle or a challenge for the parent is having the approval of the child saying, I'm good with you.
Totally.
Being with somebody, it's cool with me. I get that you have to move on. You have your needs or whatever, however that is expressed through a conversation. But essentially, that's what it means. It's like, I'm good with it. It's my stamp of approval. I'm all right with it. It won't, I get that you need somebody. And I think that's what was really the opening scene was Jake saying to his dad, I miss my mom, and then later on, you get something to the effect where he says, are you in love? And he's asking, Sisko, are you in love? Or like, what's up with you?
Because Nog, the old wise one, told him
right about the signs,
Yeah.
And so, but Jake says it's okay with me. And that's, to me, was a big kind of allowed Sisko to say, oh, okay, well, my son has reached a maturity level where, and is able to have coped with the loss of his mom, and he's at a point now where he is able to comfortably deal with the idea of me, moving on and finding somebody else. I think that's a big issue for a lot of people out there.
Yeah, and that, I mean, it was such a great moment because that Jake is not just doing this, like faking it, to make his dad happy, or he's just saying the words but not meaning it, because he's like, I want to meet her. Like, he's legitimately excited about, hey, there could be somebody in my life here that makes my dad happy. Maybe she'll make me happy. I want to meet. I thought it was really cool that he's like, I want to meet her, rather than just saying, hey, go out there and have fun, Dad. Good luck. He's like, yeah, let's hey, is there room for 3 in this picnic?
Yeah. And I thought that Sisko there gave a good response, which is one that I would give. It's just, I think it's too soon for that, right? Because you don't want to introduce somebody, if you are dating, and introduce your dates to everybody, to your kid all the time. It's like, Dad, you're dating. Yeah, I met this the 8th person I met in the last 6 months. It's like, it's not a good deal. So you have to make sure that they pass all the hurdles before you get to the stage where you're comfortable to introduce them to your kid. It's like, okay, we're getting serious. I know that we want to build a life together, and I want to introduce you to my kid. It's not really the best thing to be doing, to introduce all your dates that are potentials but not really serious potentials to the family structure, because that will have a traumatic I believe effect in the long run.
I'm trying to think of if Sisko was on a dating app, what that dating app would be, but I can't think of one. So everybody in the comments below, probably more clever than I am, so come up with something. If Sisko were on a dating app, and that's why he's like, dude, I can't introduce you to every single girl I meet, okay? Like every new shuttle pod that shows up, or shuttlecraft, or spaceship, or whatever, I start swiping again. Anyway,
the app is called Hook, and it's for captains only.
Oh, okay, that's very good. It's got a nice hook to it. I like that. Wow.
Yeah, that's
no need, everybody. I got this one.
I've been on there a few times on hook.com.
But no, captain of captain of your high school basketball team, but nothing since then.
Yes, exactly. Co-captain, even at that. It wasn't exactly the full out captain, but yeah, and just like the seeing the youngness in everybody, like this is Sisko pre goatee, and pre bald head, so that was another thing. It's just a different look, and I don't know, there was a sense of nostalgia looking at this and just kind of watching this episode. I really felt
totally
I felt like, oh, this is something really that I savor. You know, when you put that one piece of dessert away and you've just been savoring, you want to savor each bite.
Yeah.
This was one of those moments where I enjoyed that the slowness of the pace, where I might have not enjoyed it earlier watching it. I would have probably said, "This is kind of slow. What's going on? There's no action. There's nobody at death. You know, like
Yeah.
who's dying? What's going to happen? There's no real drama in this episode." But I kind of enjoyed it because it allowed me to savor the moments and sit there and watch the kind of Sisko was very playful in this episode. I thought, like when he comes to ask Odo for a favor, he's kind of like asking, like, you know, because he's asking as a friend and not as the captain. So normally when he comes in, he's like, Odo, I need you to do this, this, and this. It's more like orders. But in this
Yeah.
case, he was
It's
like,
kind of beating around
like,
the bush a little
he's like,
bit.
yeah. So there's this thing that I kind of need your help with.
She's got long, beautiful locks of hair. She was wearing red,
Yeah.
big brown eyes. You know the type.
Odo's like,
He's like, relax,
okay.
bro.
Yeah. What's her name? You don't know. Okay. You're head over heels in love with somebody you have no idea about.
And by the way, I am wearing the same shirt that I wore when Kat, Heather, and Melissa reviewed this episode. I went back and watched it. It was a nice, cool Led Zeppelin shirt because we did pop in for the first couple minutes just to say, hey, how are you to everybody? And then drop it off to them. And we cut out and did our fun holiday stuff 3 years ago. But anyway, I just wanted to make sure everybody knew that wearing that same special shirt. But I did want to say that I completely agree with you about this episode, that it was so special to me. And I wouldn't have had it any other way, because we've had like basically 3 seasons of high drama, of darkness, of war. And it was so nice to look back at like the good old days or the happy times or the innocence of youth or whatever it was, you know, and maybe
even seeing Dax,
that's
Dax,
right,
like,
that's true.
I mean, seeing Jadzia, you know, I was like, oh, there she is. Because, you know, we hadn't seen her for a while.
Yeah, that's true.
Coming up with season 7.
Yeah, it was like I agree that if we had seen this 3 years ago, would we have judged the episode more harshly? Whereas today, it feels like exactly what I needed, exactly what I wanted. There's no new Deep Space Nine episodes ever again, and I want to look back and kind of remember them how they were. You know, like you like to look back at, you know, people like to look back at their kids as, oh, when they were 5 or whatever, you know, whatever it is. There's like some precious moment in there. And it was so nice to just look back and just see them fussing about off something that's not even really that important compared to what we know they go through later. And they're just like, oh, there's a mystery to solve, you guys. And darn it, I kissed a girl and I'm not sure if she even exists. And it was just so charming. I loved it. I loved it to pieces.
I did too. And another thing that stood out to me in the beginning, just off of the opening scene and, you know, just prior to the credits rolling, opening credits, this was you said November 1993.
Yeah.
And this is November 1993. And all I could think of as I was watching the opening scene, I was thinking, wow, this is a Star Trek show that has a Black family opening this show. And it's basically an all Black opening because it cuts from the dream sequence to Sisko and Fenna. So I'm thinking, wow, this is a Star Trek show in 1993 that has an all Black cast opening their show, you know, for this episode. And I'm thinking, this is the kind of forward thinking, the kind of diversity, the kind of groundbreaking ideas that they were putting on television in this time period. And it was completely being unnoticed for that particular reason. That aspect of it was being overlooked. and I believe that it's something that is significant when you look at it in hindsight.
Yeah, I hadn't even thought of that because of the fact that this show was so successful in normalizing this kind of thing. So they have a hand in making this less noticeable because they normalize this. They weren't just like, oh my God, we're going to be doing this and we're going to be doing that. They just, hey, it's a dad and a son, and they're talking about the mom, the wife. Then he's meeting another lady. And, I really can't think of another word other than normalizing that for us 30 years ago, to the point where now it does take someone like you to kind of point that out, because they've succeeded in normalizing that for us in trailblazing. But back then it was not normal at all. It was trailblazing, and they should absolutely be commended for that. I agree.
Yeah, and the idea of normalizing, I think that's a very good point you brought up as well, because it does feel so natural that it doesn't feel like it's something to point out. It just doesn't seem like it's misplaced. For example, like, whoa, this is something that I'm not used to. It seems like you're used to it when you're watching a conversation between a father and son, and and having these kind of personal moments. So it's just kudos to the writing. Once again, I just think that if you write good stories with depth and believable scenario, situations, and dialogue, then you don't have to say, hey, look at me, look what I'm doing over here. I've got a black guy standing here and he's black.
And it's also believable relationships.
Right.
Like, it just feels so normal and good and happy. And we just get sucked into watching a father and son. And I know that Deep Space Nine is finally now getting, the kudos that it deserves for having such a healthy and wholesome relationship. And this was a very wholesome episode, in my opinion, as well. It's just so refreshing. And I just hope that Deep Space Nine continues to get their flowers for what they did, because this is the best, I think, parent to child relationship in all of Star Trek ever.
Very soft moments there. I really love the energy between Avery and I in that opening scene. I thought it was great. The way he was listening, the way he puts his arm around my shoulder, just there's certain things, there's just subtle moments there that are just good parenting to me. That's what good parenting is actually, is listening to your kid, being involved, asking questions, tell me about it, what happened, what's going on in your mind, what are you thinking about? And I think that's an example of good parenting. And thankfully, Avery has those kind of parental instincts, because that's what makes it so authentic when you see it on display.
Yeah. So the chemistry between the two of you is undeniable. It's really good. Off camera, clearly you guys had a very good bond, and it shows on camera. Let's take a super quick break and hop on to the second half of this time machine we call Second Sight, which is ironically called Second Sight because it's kind of our first sight of this episode.
Well, it's our second sight because we actually did review it, but now we're watching it, the two of us, as our first sight, but the show's second sight.
Right.
So it's the Seventh Rule second sight.
What a paradox. Oh my God, this is madness. All right. We'll be right back on the Seventh Rule, the paradox champ of the world. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Seventh Rule with Cirroc Lofton.
Hello.
As you know, we are doing an episode of Deep Space Nine. Cirroc and I have never seen before, but the show has, with Melissa Longo, Heather Jordan, and Kat R. King. The latter two were our Trek techs back in 2019. And during the break, Cirroc, because I said Paradox instead of Paradox, he said, hey, that would have been a great name for a title for an episode. It's so true.
Yeah.
Some Dax episode where she's like in two places at once, or two things are happening.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, so let's
That would
knock
be
out these
perfect.
here trivioids, of which there were many. This is another thing I want to talk about a little later, is there were definitely more trivioids in earlier seasons than in later seasons. And I noticed that towards the end. But here are the trivioids this week. Captain Sisko is having trouble sleeping. Yesterday was the 4th anniversary of the massacre at Wolf 359, as well as the anniversary of Jennifer's death. Bajorans have a constellation called the Runners. Jake Sisko dreams about a sloping floor. Jake Sisko has a calculus test in the morning, and Jake Sisko misses his mother. Captain Sisko likes his Taralton tea with a double twist of lemon. Sisko doesn't talk to anyone in the mornings until he's finished his first cup of Racticino. Dax eats Captain Sisko's final piece of Andorian tuber root. Altrina vomited all over the table, that Altrina. Villis Thed is a short-range telepath. That's a good trivioid. Sisko can't talk man-to-man with Dax anymore. Gideon Sayatic is a raging egomaniac, and Halanon's mate for life. Right. So
Wow.
That's, I don't know
Villis? You're going to say, what you talking about, Villis?
I was not, but I'm glad you said
it. Well, what is Villis?
Villis.
You said Villis
Thed. Right?
Yeah.
Let me see where I can find it. Yeah, Villis Thed. So when they mentioned him, Odo is talking to a security guys. It's like an establishing shot for the scene before Sisko comes in. He's advising to a security guys. He's talking about Villis Thed, and he says that Villis Thed is whatever
short range.
Yeah, a short range telepath. I put in my notes somewhere, but it made me think, oh, I wonder if he's connected. This Villis Thed is when he's near Captain Sisko. Maybe that's when Sisko has these dreams that this woman's here. Or maybe Villis Thed is creating this woman and she's really Villis Thed in disguise. And he can come up close to people and be a telepath and make changes, whatever. And I'm trying to like piece these kind of things together. And then at the end of the episode, I realized Villis Thed is not relevant to the story at all. He's just a trivioid. What he is just an added detail that I feel like Deep Space Nine used to do more than they did in the later seasons, which was, okay, Captain Sisko goes and visits Odo. Okay, well, we need a day in the life of Odo before he shows up. So Odo needs to be like giving instructions. But they didn't stop there. They added detail to those instructions. He could have just said, find the thief and get back to me, grumble. And then Sisko comes in. But they wanted to add more details. They wanted to give the fans something more to chew on, even if it's not relevant to the story. It's just more in the lore of Deep Space Nine, in the lore of Star Trek. It's just more. And I love that. And later on in the seasons, they did that less. Some people might think it's because it's better writing, more sophisticated writing, to where, like the one guy famously said, if you're going to show a gun in this act, you better fire that gun in the later act, right? If you're going to mention it, it needs to come through. So maybe more sophisticated writing or better writing would say that everything does have to pay off. Everything has to have something. But I'm very happy with just throwing out extra details just to expand the lore and to give us more to chew on, or just as a tiny little red herring for us to guess about. So I was really happy about that. It was really cool.
Yeah, I took note of the same point that you're making, but in a different way. I didn't use the Villisted, which I did take note of Villisted. I was like, short range telepath. I was like, this for sure has something to do with the story.
Yeah.
Uh, and then I thought it was interesting later on that the character that Sisko is chasing around, this Fennec character, essentially is a short range telepath or some kind of form of that,
Yeah.
So I thought it was weird that they would give that away if they're going to save that for later. It's kind of a weird thing. So that was strange to me. I instantly thought it had something major to do with the story. But what I thought of in regards to what you're talking about as far as giving backstory, and I thought of the Klingon poetry that was being expressed between them, right? And they started talking about that, and he mentions the fall of Kang, and
Yeah. Non-appearance mentioned for Kang, by the way.
right. And so when they started to mention the fall of Kang, they started to mention the poet, the Klingon poet. I thought of how much backstory they do on creating the culture of Star Trek that they refer to themselves with, right? It's like they have their own culture, their own backstory that they can say, you remember that poem that what's his name wrote, or Sarek, or this or that, and it's great to me that they have an entire history of backstory in the sense of, which could mirror our own kind of history about the Roman Empire, the Egyptians, and this and that. They do that same kind of referencing, but with their own fictional created in this universe. So I thought that's so clever of the writers that they have a limitless, basically, end of backstory that they can write. And I thought that's so clever that Star Trek has its own cultural references that actually that overlap too with our own. So they mentioned Da Vinci, for example. So Da Vinci would be something that we would bring up, right? And so they not only incorporate our Da Vinci and Einstein's and our historical past, but they also include an entirely new one with the Klingons and the Romulans and the Vulcans and their histories in their past. So I just, as far as world building is concerned, I thought that's excellent world building on the level of any kind of world building that's ever been done with J.R. Tolkien and all of that kind of stuff. It's detailed, excellent world building that has been handed from one show to the next, from writers to writers. And I just think, when I think about it, I say, wow, it's funny how you can make these references to Kang or the Sword of Kalis or this or that. And these are really non-existing things that are burned in our memory. So they actually become as real as the other memories that we don't know anything about, like, Ramesses or the pharaohs or whatever we haven't seen. But it becomes as real as that to us because it feels as real as you hear it over and over again.
One of those things you mentioned, I was definitely gonna mention that as well, is that not only are they building, this world building, and they're building this lore, but they're doing it for future shows.
So like, I want you to get that thing done.
Yeah. They're
Irish out of school. Sorry about that.
No problem.
Yeah,
they're building it for future. They're building it for future shows, whether they're aware of it or not. But other shows are now going to look back and say, and there's this certain Klingon poetry. They could look back and mention, Venus Fed or whatever the guy's name was, and then all the Star Trek nerds go back and be like, who's that? Who's that? Oh, I found it. Deep Space Nine, season 2, episode 9. He was mentioned once as a telepath, and so all of those details aren't just for the present of the show, but they're trailblazing a path for all the future shows to reference later.
Yes. And one of my favorite lines in this, and by the way, the man who played the professor who was going to ignite the sun is an actor that I've seen in many things, and I admire his work. I think he's a fantastic actor, and I really enjoyed seeing him in this episode. He played the egomaniac to a T. He was actually he was likable as an egomaniac because he acknowledged that he was right. He wasn't unaware of how self-absorbed he was
about himself.
Right, but he wasn't unaware of it. He was complete. He would completely acknowledge it all the time. He's like, "What were we talking about?" And he would say, "You." Oh yes, my favorite subject. He was completely honest about how infatuated he was with himself. But yes, as far as like dropping these little nuggets like Villasted or whatever kind of nuggets that they drop, it's nuggets that are able to be picked back up again later on in the future from other future writers that can just come back to these storylines and say, hey, you remember that star that was ignited? Well, that became, the center of another galaxy, and there's these people that live there, and they worship the guy who killed himself, who sacrificed his life to ignite the star, and like could be a whole nother subculture just based off of one episode. So once again, just the amount of world building that these writers do is fantastic, and I love watching it. And then you get great lines like the professor said to Dax, "Some of us only have one lifetime."
That was a great line. I loved it.
It was classic. It was classic. Funny. That's like it's the perfect thing to say when you're waiting. Sometimes you're standing in line and you're looking like.
Yeah,
I wish people would move on, and you're like, hurry up. I only got one lifetime.
That actually gave me my biggest laugh. And I did have a few laughs. That one was my biggest one for sure. A couple other laughs in there were, let's see, where were they? When Kira says, do you think he'd notice if we weren't here when he came back? That was funny, like when Vayatek, it was gone and she's like, can we just sneak out of here? That was funny. And just when Jake said the 3 signs of being in love were loss of appetite, daydreaming, and smiling all the time, that also made me laugh. What was it? Oh, Gideon. What was his name? Gideon Sayatic. He says, I never fail. Well, I did once, but it didn't agree with me, so I swore to never do it again. But there were a few good laughs, but definitely that first one was the biggest. But it does remind me also very quickly that I've got a nitpick on that subject.
Let us know.
When they first meet Gideon, he makes a joke to Sisko. He says, a man of intelligence and taste, whatever it was, a man of intelligence and taste. And Sisko laughs, ha ha ha, so funny. That's not funny. Don't laugh. If somebody makes a dumb joke when you first meet them, don't laugh at it, or it's just going to encourage them to do it more. Trust me, I know from experience. And he did keep making dumb jokes. Trust me, just word to the wise. If somebody makes a dumb joke right away, don't encourage
Don't do it.
Don't encourage them.
When I was laughing when he says, I've read your autobiography. He said something like, "Oh yes, all 9 volumes." and I started laughing like, this guy's got a 9-volume autobiography. But then it made me think. Then they cut to O'Brien's face, and O'Brien had the look of disgust that just was pure classic gold. It was only O'Brien can make that particular face where he's just like, this guy's an idiot, and it's registered all over O'Brien's face when he does the "you're an idiot" look. You really feel like you're an idiot because he just conveys it so well. So I laughed a lot when I heard that. And then I heard when Major Kira's like, hey, I want to get the hell out of here to some degree, just paraphrasing. But she wanted to roll out because she couldn't stand it.
Yeah, you think he'd even notice if we left? Like, would he even notice, or would he just keep talking to himself?
So yeah. Oh, and another moment was very special that I thought was really great was when Sisko sees that, Gideon's wife is the woman that he's been searching for, Dax gives a great line right there and says, now we have something to talk about.
Now we can talk about this.
Yeah.
There was another moment too, and this was just a little acting moment right at that scene when Gideon tells everybody, he says, "Oh, Nadell is utterly infatuated with me. Can't blame her, actually." Sisko looks at him with a smile, but like bullshit detectors going off in his eyes. Like he's got like this great look of like the smile, but like his eyes are like super suspicious. Like, I don't know, bro. I don't know. Really good look there.
Oh, yes. No, like I said, normally I think if I had watched this 3 years ago, I probably would have complained about the pace. I would have said, "Oh, this didn't have enough action," and the moment where Gideon kind of reveals, "Okay, well, here's the real deal." It was like all this build up for that. I thought was kind of not much of a climax. Like.
Mm-hmm.
All right, let me just tell you, my wife, can astral project her feelings or whatever it was.
But after we've seen 100 climaxes in 100 days, this was so refreshing.
But after that, I was like, oh, that's all right. I just wanted to go with the flow. And another thing I missed too was a Sisko-centric episode. So I did enjoy seeing a Sisko-centric episode. It's been a while. Because once the characters have been developed so well, all the other characters, it became so much of an entourage of an ensemble of a cast that Sisko didn't get his own episodes anymore as things started to progress. He would get parts of it, but not the whole thing. And I felt like this was a Sisko episode, and I enjoyed that as well.
And not just Sisko solving a problem or saying fire phasers, but like we're on an emotional journey with him. Like we're getting more of Sisko's emotions and growth. You know what I mean? So it was even deeper of a Sisko episode. And again, I'm so glad we went back and watched this, because this was such a great little missing piece of the puzzle of Captain Sisko and of his relationship with his son, and even Jake and Nog and kind of talking about them. I'm just shocked that we almost missed this. Like this was the most this is the most important relationship on the show, was Sisko and Jake, and Sisko's growth, and recovery as from the loss of his wife and all that. It was just great. It was like a little gift just in time for the holidays.
Yeah, it was special. And the other thing I think it did a good job of is kind of paving the way for Cassidy's character. It was kind of like a foreshadow of what was to come for her.
Yeah,
to some degree.
Maybe it kind of opened Sisko back up a little bit to make him more receptive to that possibility of dating again. Yeah.
Yeah.
That lady paved the way for Cassidy.
Yeah. This actress is Sally Richardson, if I'm not mistaken, right?
I don't know. Let's check.
The one who played Fenna.
Yeah,
I think it was Sally Richardson.
Well, I can tell you, cinematography, Marvin J. Rush, or Marvin V. Rush, I should say. Sally Richardson, right.
Was this the only episode she's been in?
I think so. Let me check on that. And I know that if I'm wrong right now, people are yelling at the screen. They're like, no, she was obviously in Deep Space Nine. Yeah, no, this was the only episode of Star Trek. Although she was in Gargoyles. A ton of Star Trek actors did voiceover for Gargoyles. So that's an interesting little connection there.
Yeah. Sally Richardson in those days in 1993 was known, at least in the Black community, as one of the most beautiful people around on television. And I do remember this episode as far as filming it because she was in it. And she used to host a show, I think. She used to be in all type of shows back in the days. I think she was in Tombstone, the movie Tombstone. But either way.
I recognize the name for sure.
Yeah,
like once you said Sally Richardson, I was like, oh, I've definitely heard her name. She must have been some kind of host, of something.
Yeah, I think she was. I don't want to misquote what she ended up doing, but I do believe she was in the movie Tombstone. But she's been in other projects.
Love Tombstone.
She's a very beautiful, just a beautiful woman, and everybody knew it at the time. And she had a pretty successful career. But I do remember her on the set.
The movie might have been Posse.
Posse, yeah, not Tombstone. It was a Western, but it was called
very
Posse.
Similar, yeah.
Yeah, that was with Mario Van Peebles, I think. Posse. So anyways, I just remember her being one of the most gorgeous people to ever walk on the studio on the back lot at Paramount.
She definitely seemed to be, to my eyes.
Yeah. Just for the record, I remember her walking while we were filming, and just everybody's kind of head turning, like, who is this extremely gorgeous woman? And that will never ever be erased from my data bank. So I'm glad that I got to rewatch this episode because it brought back those memories of working with her.
We only have a couple minutes left, but I want to point out that the story was written by Mark O'Connell, friend of the show. He joined us in season 6 for Who Mourns for Morn. If you remember that one, the Morn-centric episode. He wrote 4 episodes on Deep Space Nine. This was his first, Second Sight. Then he came back and gave us Meridian, that we know and love.
Oh, yes.
And then he also gave us For the Cause, which was an excellent one during the 4th season, and Who Mourns for Morn, and he joined us for that review. So great to have Mark O'Connell. He's also done stuff for us on Virtual TrekCon as well, on Virtual TrekCon 3 with the Lost Episodes snippets. So shout out to him. And of course, Ira Stephen Bear and Robert Hewitt Wolf also wrote the teleplay with him. Really cool. Yeah. So much more to talk about, it seems. Sally Richardson, I got to figure out why I know her name, because it definitely sounds very familiar. She did host a ton of stuff. I checked. There was like the BET Awards, Diversity Awards, all kinds of stuff, like in the 90s. Very famous lady, it seems. But let's, right now, before we head over to the free-for-all, give a very special thanks to a few people. And by few, I mean a few fews. Phew, that was a mouthful. Homer Frizzell, Dr. Marie Segal, Eve England out in Wales, Yvette Blackmon-Tom, Carmen, a.k.a. Skillet, Timothy Baum, TJ Jackson-Bey out in Missouri, Bill Victor Arucan, Titus Mohler, Darlena Marie, John Mann, Dr. Mohamed Noor, Tierney C. Dieckmann, Anna Post, Rex A. Wood, Anil O. Polat, Erika Stroem, Joe Balsarotti, Mike Gu, Dequeue, Neal Akasaka, Justine Norton-Kertson, Dr. Stephanie Baker, Carrie Schwent, Faith Howell, Edward Foltz, Radek Orszewski out in Southwest Poland, of course, Henry Unger, Mai live from Tokyo, Matt Boardman, Chris McGee, and of course, Dr. Susan V. Gruner. All right. You ready for the free-for-all?
Let's do it.
All right. You heard him, everybody. Let's do it. Time for the free-for-all. Stick around. We will be right back on the 7th rule. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the 7th rule with Cirroc Lofton.
Hello.
You know this is the free-for-all. We've got TJ Jackson-Bey here, Carrie Schwent, Dr. Susan V. Gruner, Eve England. We've got Justin, a.k.a. Shaggy. We've got Goldie Scott, Melissa Longo, Chris McGee, my live in Tokyo, Tierney C. Dieckmann, Faith Howell, Matt Boardman, and Homer Freezy out somewhere in Starbase 80. All right.
80.
Well, let's just keep the conversation going. First of all, you guys, Jake Sisko guesses the IMDb score.
Oh, the IMDb. I'm going to say this was probably like a 7.2, 7.3, somewhere in that range.
Sue's pissed at that assessment. Anybody else have any guesses that doesn't already know?
I think it might be lower than that.
I think it might be lower too.
6.8.
Same.
5.7.
I was going to say 6.1.
I'll go 6.4.
TJ's going $1.
$1.
Oh man.
I will guess for a change and split the difference at 6.4.
The answer today is 6.2, Cirroc. That is a crime.
Yikes.
That is just ghastly. Everybody go.
Obviously, they didn't watch it right. You have to watch the whole series and then go back and watch it. Then it's a 7.3.
Then it's amazing.
Scores went higher after his voice changed, I think.
That's true.
Aww.
Did you guys catch the NAMs today? The non-appearance mentions of the day.
One. I only got two.
Nog, for sure.
Did you say, wait, Kales was mentioned?
There are 4.
That was Kang.
Okay, yeah, we got
Sorry,
Kang. Yeah.
Kang.
Yeah. Kang, Curzon, Jennifer, Nog.
Got him.
Thank you.
Nice.
Excellent. He's
Whoa.
been training at Starbase 80.
That's right.
Got a
That's
lot
where
of
all
time
the
on his
smart
hands when he's
people
not
go.
chasing the bat.
Smart people.
That's so cool. Great shirt. All right. Well, since the first time we reviewed this episode, Melissa Longo took the reins with our pals Heather Jordan and Kat R. King. So Melissa Longo, can you give us some insights on how you felt about this episode in contrast to how you felt about it 3 years ago when you saw it and reviewed it?
You know, I watched it with different eyeballs this time.
Gross.
I know, and my extra pair. But I found so many more wonderful moments this time going through it. There are so many beautiful moments, especially between Jake and Benjamin. And that opening scene, it should have been a 10, made this episode a 10 by itself, because Jake telling his father, "I love you," on television, you don't see that kind of relationship between a father and son, and Deep Space Nine does it better than anybody I've ever seen. And yeah, Jake blew me away in this episode when he's talking about the throwing up of his classmates.
It was disgusting.
Which is so disgusting. And then giving his father romantic advice that he got from Nog. Is brilliant.
Yeah,
brilliant.
another one of the great lines of Deep Space Nine is that quote Sisko says to Jake is great.
Yeah. But Avery is a master in everything that he does. He's such an amazing actor to watch, because there's always so much going on behind his eyes. There's always something going on in his head, and you can see it, and it's so beautiful. And I also think that the actor that played Gideon Sayatek was wonderful too. And so was Sally Richardson Whitman, the woman who played Fenna and Nadell. I thought she was really good as well. The guest actors were great, and this I think deserves a much higher score than it got. And I used to skip it way back in the day, but
What?
Wow.
Yeah,
Boo.
because it's
Me
not
too.
it's not a Kira-centric episode. So um but yeah, no, it deserves a lot better
Mhm.
accolades than it got, I think.
Mhm. Yeah, and everybody go do yourselves a favor and go check out the very first review with Kat,
Yeah.
Melissa, and Heather. Go check that out. It's like this is the companion episode to that one.
Yeah,
Dr.
that
Susan.
one we talk about the Bechtel test.
Yep. See, we didn't talk about that one in this one, believe it or not.
Right.
Dr. Susan V.
I'll tell you
Gruner
after,
is out in Starfleet Academy. What'd you think about this episode?
I thought it was a 10,
Huh.
but I didn't feel that way many times when I've watched it. I wrote on here, the first thing I wrote was, I was 37 when the original air date.
Hmm.
And the first thing that I wrote down is the I love you scene between Jake and his dad. That was just unbelievable. Again, something you don't normally see on television. And it was so real. The affection between you two is just so real. And it's just so lovely that they put that into a TV show. And then I love the line, because I'm going to give you a test, Cirroc. Did you really get a calculus test? Of course you did. But that's was your line that you had a calculus test the next day. I wrote down that I want that red jumpsuit that Fenna was wearing with the
So
train
beautiful.
and everything. I want that. I'm glad that, I don't know how to pronounce his name, the guy with the big ego, that he admitted that he could not give birth to a star. And I loved Jake's giggling, saying it was disgusting, talking about his people that threw up on the table. And then the line that I thought too that was fabulous from Benjamin to his son. You've been talking to Nog about women again? It's just, this is only season 2.
Right.
Yeah.
That's pretty amazing. And by the way, 500 degrees Kelvin is 440.33 degrees Fahrenheit, for those of you that wondered about that.
Hmm.
And any strange looking faces, why is she talking about degrees? And the one thing I hated about this episode was that awful dress that they put Nadell in at the end of I guess it was to show how bland she was compared to her projection finale. But I think it was a great episode. I thought it was very Shakespeare-esque. In the end, you love that guy for doing what he did to free his wife. I thought that was pretty amazing.
Yeah.
Definitely not a 6 point something.
Well, luckily we can fix that. Everybody, you have your marching orders. If you think it's a travesty that this is a 6.2, you could make it a 6.3. Maybe.
Maybe we all do.
If everybody does it, maybe 6.4. Well, Chris McGee is here showing off the coolest mustache here in the Alpha Quadrant. What are your thoughts on this episode?
Thank you kindly. Well, don't have many thoughts about it. But it was nice seeing a babyface Jake once again after seeing him so often here on the seventh rule. One thing that I noticed, little details, things like when Sisko was looking at the stars and talking about the runners constellation, says, I never could figure out if they were running to something or from something.
Mm-hmm.
Ask Kira or ask any number of the Bajorans. I'm sure they have an explanation, but maybe he wants to leave it a mystery. I don't know. I did, as others have said, I did love that interaction between Sisko and Jake there, talking about his dreams, the nightmare that he had. Then later on, another interaction with Sisko and Dax to help show that they used to be, the guys always talking about their relationships. I can't remember where I read it, but remember reading from somewhere that Gideon was supposed to be a likable character. He kind of came across as a little bit insufferable to me when watching this episode. Had some likable qualities, and he did redeem himself at the end, of course. During the dinner, I noticed they said they were done eating. They were retiring to another room, yet there was food on all the plates there still. I don't know if that was a bit confusing to me. And the last little bit of info I saw was that the ship that Gideon had was the Prometheus, which reminded me of another ship on another sci-fi show with star in the name. That just happened to notice that. And
did it have a common writer to Deep Space Nine?
Probably did. And that's all I'll say about it. No, it was a good episode. It was kind of a typical Star Trek sci-fi episode, and I enjoyed it thoroughly. It certainly wasn't the best, but it wasn't bad either. So I think a 6.2 is about right.
Now, Homer Frizzell is hanging out here as well. He's judging all of us, not too harshly though. Have you seen this episode recently? What'd you think?
Yes, I have. First off, I thought that Jake Sisko had two great outfits. And there's one behind me and there's one behind your chair. Voila. Yeah. So love it. They're both great. I'm sure they sucked when you had to wear them, but they look great.
Well, that one was kind of loose and pajama-y. I felt good in that one.
Pajama-y.
The one behind me?
Yeah, the one behind you was a loose kind of pajama look. I felt good and comfortable. The other one actually was pretty nice too. I just never wore it that much, but I did like it. The look of it.
Very good. So the only thing aside from the outfits, I wanted to. At the very end, Nadell comes up to see Sisko and asks how Fenna was. And he says, she's just like you. And she had said just before, I don't feel anything. And then it's like she's walking, oh, okay, well, anyway, I'm going about my life. Whereas I think maybe she might have stayed on the station another 2 or 3 days. She didn't have to get back, yet she seemed like, okay, I'm going home. I'm going to regroup. And this Fenna person, who is me, really like this guy, but I'm going home because that's what I should do. I wanted there to be a little bit more of a complication there or something, rather than like this neat, tidy ending. So there.
Yeah, and just to kind of add to your point, Homer, it feels like if the subconscious her liked him, wouldn't the conscious her like him to some degree or another?
Exactly.
There was a twinkle in her eye.
I didn't feel it when she was herself. I felt like she was looking at him like, I'm not interested.
Well,
but
she's looking
the
at
subconscious, the subconscious her like them.
And Nadell had been established that Nadell had been homesick for a very long time, so that would outweigh any latent attraction that she might have had for Sisko via Fenna.
See, full circle, kind of.
I'm skeptical.
Shocking. All right. We got Justin hanging out here with us from Michigan. Welcome, Justin. How are you? Have you seen this episode recently? And if so, what'd you think?
Actually, I watched it right before I joined you guys, and I listened to the podcast with the ladies.
Nice. Good prepping.
Points. The podcast with the ladies actually was like refreshing. They point out different things us males don't see. I got no examples, but they do.
Because we don't see them.
Exactly.
My life
This
is full of
episode-
those examples.
Yeah, right. It was a trip going back watching this episode because, like the other guy said, we've been in season 7 now, so going way back and seeing Shave Sisko or Shave Jake, it was a trip. Not my favorite episode, but
one of them.
Yeah,
it was all right. It was an episode.
Who was it? Meridian.
Also written by Mark O'Connell. And Who Mourns for Morn and For the Cause, I believe, were the 4 that he wrote.
I do want to say, though, that I'm very happy to be here. I feel like I've gotten to know you guys over the past couple months, and I had to be a part of it. So thank you for having me.
Thank you, Justin.
Make it snow.
And we do know you because we've seen you in the live chat a ton of times, and we appreciate your constant presence there and activity there. So welcome. Great addition to our team for sure.
That's where the fun is at. Forget about the videos. It's in the chat.
It's true. You guys can just put us on mute. But
yeah.
And I think I met you recently at a convention. Where do you?
That is not
No,
true.
it wasn't
We're
you.
Facebook friends.
Oh,
You
okay.
like my cat.
Yes.
But no.
Sounds about right.
Okay. So maybe it's the cat.
All right. Now, the person that invented muting us and just talking in the live chat, Mai is live in Tokyo right now. How are you today, Mai?
Hi. Just fine, just after a quick cough there. I'll try and make sense. Yeah, not my favorite episode either, but there was some interesting stuff going on. I think that the comments about the first scene are right on the money. The one thing about that scene that grabbed me was when Sisko goes to give Jake a kiss on the side of his head, and he pushes his lips up against the side of his head, and he smells his head, which is a total parent move. Mm-hmm. It was very realistic to me. I really felt that at that time, because everybody who's been a parent or doing the parent thing, that's one of our favorite things. No matter how big our kids get, that's the one thing you want to smell your kid's head, and it's part of the parenting thing. So that was right on.
Yeah.
The scene when Nadell walks in and Dax is now we've got something to talk about. I thought that was a very, very guy talk scene. That was that was amazing.
Yes.
The thing about this episode, there was a lot of wordplay, I thought. So I'm gonna go a little bit rabbinical here on you guys for a second. Surprise, surprise. But in
half of us don't know what that word means.
Yeah.
I'm part of that half.
But yeah, but in Genesis, in the Torah, in the Old Testament, the Hebrew, which I'm not even going to attempt, it translates into Latin, Dixitque Deus fiat lux et facta est lux, or as Ryan would say, Dax was driving a Fiat in a tux, and that's a fact.
Sounds like a song.
Right? based on your translation of Legolas and the other one. But anyway, it's and God said, "Let there be light," and light was made. Not that there was light, but light was made. And I thought this was interesting because time's sort of spinning backwards, because out of her emotional turmoil at being in a marriage she wanted to escape, Nadell made the being who was Fenna, and who, as Zach said, was of no cellular structure, just pure energy.
That was a song.
And what's pure energy but with no mass? It's a photon. And what's a photon? It's also known as light. So light was made, and then when Gideon's flying into the star, he says, "Let there be light." So the command was given after light was made. So there's a bit of a serious temporal anomaly going on there, I thought, which in a sort of circular way takes us back forward to what UC Berkeley and the rest of the UC system does with Fiat Lux as their motto. But there it's taken more to mean let there be wisdom. So I thought that's interesting. The other was another biblical reference with all of this Torah and Old Testament stuff going, that they called him Gideon. I mean, he's got his Bibles in all the hotel rooms, right? A good episode, I'm going to give it a medium plus. Sisko going all in so quickly on that love affair, I didn't buy that at all. That was just not well written, that part. But great to see a squeaky voice Jake. I love that. It was entertaining. It was fun to go back, and after we've done the last couple of talks about the end of the season and the end of the series and so forth, it was nice to dive back into an episode and hang out. So I for that, I really enjoyed it. But otherwise, medium, maybe.
I was more shocked that Fenna said she straight up loved him. She was like, I love you. I was like, whoa.
Yeah.
2 steps back, honey.
Walk down a couple of corridors.
Clinger here. Must be a good kisser.
Hey, if you were married to Gideon, you would love anybody
Ouch.
All right. Good stuff. What's up, Matt Boardman, hanging out outside of Deep Space Nine with your pal Faith, but we'll get to her in a moment. What do you think of this, Matt?
Well, like Melissa, this is an episode that I tend to skip over usually. I've watched. I was trying to think how many times I've watched through Deep Space Nine, and it's probably past 20. So you kind of get a little choosy about what episodes you skip over. But it was good to watch it again because I talked about last time how sometimes you watch something and depending on where you're at in your life, you see different things. And this one, what kind of stuck out to me was, we're talking about Jennifer's death and having as someone who's divorced, it's like I remembered back to not long after my divorce and that whole decision to start dating people again, and that because the divorce wasn't my decision, there was some reluctancy, in some ways it kind of felt like I was maybe betraying that memory of the of our marriage that, obviously it was no longer there, but so I kind of related to Sisko in a way, because he was just kind of and so, but what I liked about it was that this kind of opened the door, for later on in the, with Cassidy. But I also had the thought at the end of this episode, I wonder if they ever kicked around the idea of bringing her back, as a potential romantic interest. Not that I don't love, Penny and Cassidy. I think it was perfect, but I wonder if that was ever debated. But yeah, no, I enjoyed it actually this time around, and it had another had a funny moment when they're all at dinner there, and the interaction between Sisko and Kira when they, Sisko or Kira's like, do you think he'd notice if we left? And Sisko's like, do you know how many meetings I've had to sit through with Bajoran officials? Like, you owe me this one. Besides, he's one of the Federation's greatest minds, and she's like, I know, he told me. So, but yeah, it was fun to watch it through again, and I think I enjoyed it more this time. Maybe it was one of those absence makes the heart grow fonder moments, but yeah, I think this time around it was fun.
All right, we do have a poll right now amongst us, everybody at home, and the question is, have you skipped this episode in a rewatch before? It's practically a 50-50. It is a 50-50 split. Somebody just voted last second.
Oh, no.
And half of us have skipped this episode and half of us have. Oh, shoot, Cirroc, I guess you and I technically did, didn't we?
So I gotta change my answer.
Yeah, we technically did skip this episode.
I gotta change my answer then.
Anyway, let us know in the comments below, everybody, if you have skipped this episode before and if you regret it. Now, Goldu Scott Jensen, I guarantee he did not skip this episode. What do you think of this episode, by the way?
You were right about that. I don't skip episodes because then it throws the whole thing out of order, and I can't watch anything out of order. I'm crazy. And I did also, like everybody else is saying, this was more enjoyable with probably where we were and coming back. But the parts that I loved particularly about this the most is that how much it felt like it was just another day on Deep Space Nine. There were a lot of little just bits of minutia about just being another day. Kira and Sisko's talk about how he doesn't talk to anybody until he has his coffee, which I super related to. His This is throughout the day, going through in the morning. I absolutely loved every single second that Sciatek was talking or on screen or doing anything. That guy was 100% amazing. He has got a extensive IMDb. The guy has been he's an amazing, famous actor. He's won awards for his voice work too. He did a lot of like History Channel voiceovers, which I can 100% tell just by listening to him. He was absolutely great. I also, while I was digging around looking at his stuff, I looked at Sally Richardson Whitfield, and it was something pretty cool. Is that she was on a TV show called, what was it, Stitchers? It was like, it ran for like 31 episodes. It was this little sci-fi blip somewhere. I haven't looked to see if I could find it anywhere. But she starred and directed an episode, and also had episodes with John Billingsley and Odin Fair as well. Oded Fair, which I thought was really cool.
Cool.
So they had a little Trek connection like that.
Oded Fair was the guy that he plays the admiral in Discovery, right? Admiral Vance that famously told us about apples and poop.
He had some actual scenes with Billingsley, so that was pretty cool. I'm gonna go see if I can find it, figure out where it's at, and give it a watch. It sounds cool. It's another one of those the government has this secret branch that does this sci-fi thing that nobody knows about, and that kind of thing. So I'm gonna go check it out. But I had a couple favorite lines once again, like everybody else was saying, that Cirroc laughing in the middle of that laugh with it was pretty disgusting. Is such a kid to enjoy being like I've said it before at work. I was raised in the jackass generation, so that kind of stuff is just absolutely hilarious to me too. And to hear Jake just break up, and it seemed like it was really actually funny to him, so it was awesome. But my favorite moment in this episode was just a quick little moment between Sisko and O'Brien. And because I feel like I'm kind of the O'Brien in a lot of my friend groups and some of the places I've worked, where Sisko said, "Admit it, Chief, if you were on a station where everything worked, you would be miserable." And then O'Brien goes, "You might be right, sir, but I'm willing to give it a try."
I'll try it.
And that was just, I felt that to the core of my soul as well. I might give it a try. I don't know. Yeah, so I would say I had some fun watching it for different reasons than I've watched it in the past, just looking at minutia and background stuff. It was a lot of fun.
Good stuff. Well, somebody that watched Jackass like once or twice, but decided it wasn't for her, Tierney C. Dieckmann is here. And what do you think of this? Yeah, I can tell. What do you think of this episode?
We get a couple nitpicks out of the way. It was not so much that the romance relationship felt fast, but almost the pacing of the episode felt a little fast towards the end, from what's happening with this mysterious woman to here's what's happening very suddenly, and Nadell is dying, and this is what Fenna is. And I kind of would have liked to know a little more about what Fenna is and her species, and a little bit more on that. Other tiny nitpick was a very prominent terraformer scientist like Sciatek said degrees Kelvin as opposed to just Kelvin. A stupid thing, but bothered me.
Point.
It really did. It just hit me like, no, stop that. But there were some great points too. Sally, what's her full name? Richardson Whitfield. Thank you. I like her quite a bit. I've seen her in many little and long-standing sci-fi roles, and I actually misread the poll. I thought it was, do you skip episodes on rewatch occasionally? Not this specific one. So this one I don't skip because I actually quite like her for it, and that fabulous red outfit, which would make an amazing cosplay at some point for anybody someday. In Voyager, Barclay's seducing lady wore that same red outfit. It was repurposed. So if you think of that back in that episode, it was the same one. The blonde with the little flippy hair and the Ferengi, she wears it. And then the first thing that hit me though was the Jake and Sisko relationship. I love their relationship. It's just it's so great. And but besides all that, I'm so glad I went back and got a chance to rewatch this and be here for this one. It was like slipping into a warm DS9 blanket. I mean, after everything that we've just gone through with season 7, there's no Dominion War. Sisko still has hair and no beard. Jake isn't super tiny, but you're still pretty tiny and just a little bit squeaky. And he is still there. And Bashir is still boyish at that point and happy, and it's still kind of alien of the week. It's so comfy, and I've been a little afraid to what I'm going to do with DS9 after analyzing all of this. Of like, can I do a restart at this point without looking at it so differently? And going back there, it's like, oh, I could just let this keep playing as it used to and be fine with it and remember just how comfy and wonderful it is. So this was really nice to go back and get into. And it's an interesting-ish episode. It's not fantastic. Maybe not a 6.2, was it? The on the IMDb? It could have been a little higher than that.
Yeah.
But it's still a nice episode, and it's good to see Sisko progressing after everything with his wife. It gave an opening for this man has gone through trauma and he's willing to to bring in relationships for him. And then Jake being very open to his father finding someone and very intuitive of, Dad, are you in love? And just so yeah, it's a very enjoyable episode, even with its faults, and I definitely recommend it. And yeah, it was great.
No faults.
Well,
speaking of no faults, you guys, TJ Jackson-Bey is here. What's up, TJ?
What's up?
By the way, we have a poll right now just amongst us, everybody at home, and everybody prefers Fenna to Nadell. That's messed up, you guys. How are you, TJ? What do you think of this episode?
I enjoyed it. It's it is interesting. Like some other people mentioned, going back after having watched the 7 seasons, which I've been kind of doing anyway, and I haven't since I started watching along with this show. I haven't gone back any, and so it's like the first time I'm going back, and it's kind of interesting journey. So someone just kind of stole my nitpick in the chat and said, what's going on with this ship and its crew? Like, where is everybody? Where's the captain?
Just a lieutenant.
Okay, so a guy just stole a shuttlecraft and is flying it into a dead star, and the captain doesn't come to the bridge? Come on. And also, the second and third time that Sisko sees Fenna, why is he not like, isn't that the same stuff you were wearing, the other day? So I think Jake is the only one that changed clothes in this episode. But I give a pass to the Starfleet crew because they probably have like 2 or 3, 4, 5, 6, uniforms that they change out. But regular people should not be wearing the same thing, day after day after day. But other than that,
you can sonic shower with your clothes on.
Whoa.
Get it all done at the same time.
There it is. There's the answer, guys. Okay. My other thing, of course, the opening scene, chef's kiss. And even the scene right after that, where Sisko meets Fenna and they're talking about the runners. After watching the whole episode, I thought that really kind of set the stage for the episode because that's kind of an analogy for what Nadell / Finna is going through. Like Nadell is trying to get away from this, relationship that no longer fulfills her. So it's almost like she's running away, but Finna is trying to get to something, that she appreciates, which she said at first she thought it was a place. And then it became, Sisko. So she's running to something. So she is the runners. I think that was an excellent setup for, this episode and the journey that, she goes on in this projection. So that's my take.
See, and you guys were so negative about this episode. TJ got it. Faith Howell, who's never been negative about anything so far, continuing on to today. How are you? What'd you think?
I'm doing well, and fingers crossed my son doesn't turn the lights out on me again. He's just figured out light switches, so sorry if I disappear. So I also tend to skip this one because I guess my knee jerk is I'm not ready for Sisko to be dating. And I know we all have that feeling about any friends that have lost people. Sometimes we're not ready, even though they're ready. You just got to close your mouth and let it happen. But I really love that opening scene, and I never noticed before. I mean, you do notice that they're processing trauma, but coming off of season 7, where we talk so much about trauma, it kind of hit home a little different this time. That was a really great scene for the two of them, not just Jake, especially Jake, but for Sisko too. He starts off the episode saying, I almost missed it. I can't believe I almost missed it. And then Jake comes out having the same kind of thoughts, even, half asleep, he's having the same thoughts. And so I was really touching to see them processing through together. And then thinking through it in that lens, I can kind of see how maybe it is time that he's starting to kind of move on a little bit. He's not existing there anymore. And that's really healthy and positive. And I also, I come around to different episodes periodically. That's why I love watching Deep Space Nine over and over and over again. I know we talk about the Bible, and this is going to be really blasphemous, but I'm going to say it anyway. Deep Space Nine is almost my Bible. Like, people read the Bible and they pick up something different every time they read through it. To me, Deep Space Nine is like that. Every time I pass through, I'm at a little different place in my life, and I pick up something a little different. And having just gone through COVID and everything that we've been through, I can kind of see how Fenna could, she loves her husband and she values her husband. She's going to stay with him, but she also kind of wants to be somewhere else. And can't we all imagine, in one way or the other, wishing we could be somewhere else sometimes, and wanting to go travel, or wanting to just not have to be stuck at home with kids all the time, or whatever it is that you wish you could vacate from your life sometimes. And, I kind of understand that dynamic a little differently today than I think I have in the past. So it was interesting to come back to that episode today.
Yeah, that would be an interesting thing. If you could go anywhere, where would it be? And then people would have some pretty good answers, I would think, to that. I think we'd all just say Deep Space Nine, though. So we'd have to eliminate that one ahead of time. Eve England, who's wearing an actual Deep Space Nine shirt referencing the Lower Decks episode, I think she mentioned that Homer sent it her way, or at least hooked her up with how to get it. How are you today?
Yeah, good, thanks. Although I seem to have had a different interpretation of watching this completely. I felt like this the last time I watched it. There are all of the glorious scenes and all those lovely little bits that everyone has already mentioned that I think really do save this episode. But what I just felt really uncomfortable with the relationship, and why Nadal was becoming Fenna, and I just felt that they kind of missed a trick with this episode, because that was, to me, quite, it's quite a serious issue. In now terms, well, especially here, she was subject to emotional abuse. So, she could be, he could have been done for domestic abuse if they were living in the UK. I mean, that scene where they all leave and just leave her to clean up the dishes after they've eaten, and how they talk about how she's, made all this food, but it's at his instruction. He's the genius behind this recipe and not her.
Mm-hmm.
And I just found it quite upsetting that to get through that, she was having to put her life at risk to project this alter ego just to escape. And then I just got the sense at the end, okay, yeah, he does the right thing, but I felt that maybe they could have presented that a bit differently in terms of the writing and how, to me, it wasn't poignant enough. He didn't really seem that upset that he was done. It was all about his glory and his legacy. He didn't really even say, oh my gosh, I love my wife and all of this, I didn't get that emotional kick to his suicide, basically, which I think that's what it kind of needed. And they kind of glossed over then that whole, abusive relationship piece. So to me, that's the thing I took out, that I was like, I just wish that could have been a really interesting and important point to cover with a bit more empathy, I think. But apart from that, which I did have an issue, I think all of the other points are fantastic. And looking back at the relationship between O'Brien and Bashir, and obviously because I don't think they're really friends at this point, are they? And I couldn't quite remember when they kind of start to really gel. But that scene when they're all there and he, what's the guy's name? And he's going on a bragging about his volume, and Bashir is obviously like, oh my God, this is amazing, because he's basically him. And then you see O'Brien in the background rolling his eyes. And I was like, yeah, because he's that sort of working class Irish man at the back who's like,
I saw that.
Am I? This is just horrendous. And I just thought that was absolutely horrendous. And you just wouldn't see quite that dynamic in sort of season 6 or 7. And then my final point, in the companion, they talk about that, that beautiful scene where they're up on the upper pylon. And I think it was a new shot for this episode. And in the script, apparently the description was, it was, the station is a vast glowing jewel against the darkness of space. And I just thought, oh, that's Deep Space Nine. And I just read, I thought that was just a perfect example and description of how amazing Deep Space Nine is. So I just love that aspect. But yeah, I had issues with it, and that's why I don't particularly like. So I think the low rating is kind of fair, but it had some really beautiful other moments, which everyone has already talked about.
Good stuff. Great point. So Eve says Gideon's death was a happy ending. Carrie Schwent is here also hanging out with us, being very patient with some kind of skyline in the background, but I don't know what.
New York.
It's New York?
New York City. That's the Empire State Building, like coming out of my shoulder.
So what'd you think of this episode? You loved it more than Eve did, right?
No, I'm kind of with Eve on this. It's got its good moments, and I'll get to those, but it's not my favorite. Although this episode did afford me the absolute perfect opportunity to wear this shirt. It says never forget Wolf 359. And then it's got the title. Found it online a couple of years ago, and just I absolutely love it. We wore it on one of the Star Trek cruises. But I've got my last DS9 haiku, and then I've got a couple of nitpicks, and then my favorite stuff. So I'll start with the haiku, and because I didn't like it as much, it was a little bit harder to come up with it, but I think I managed something passable. It goes, Ben meets strange woman. She is just a projection. Sayatek frees her. And yeah, I'm kind of with Eve on Sayatek. She kind of hit pretty close to my nitpick. And he's constantly talking about, every single woman I've ever married has, they love me at first, but then they eventually leave me. So why the hell would he marry someone who marries for life and can't or won't leave no matter how unhappy she is? Why would he do that to her? I mean, even him sacrificing himself at the end was basically the least he could do. Since he anyway,
excuse yourself from our universe.
Wow. I mean, he could build a time machine and kill himself earlier.
Go back and just not marry her to begin with, and then he can keep fueling his ego. if he had just not married her to begin with. Living, I speak from experience, living with someone like that it's not a picnic. They might have their good moments from time to time, but it's not a picnic. And the other nitpick I had, and it's a fairly minor one, and I'm a little bit colored by all the crowds in New York over the weekend when I was there last. But Fenna and Sisko walking along, it's basically the middle of the night, yet there's that one guy walking towards him that practically knocks Sisko over as he's walking past him and doesn't even say excuse me or anything, just sort of half bumps his shoulder as he's walking past him and just keeps going. It's a pretty decently wide hallway. He couldn't walk a little bit further along and past them without practically running into it.
He was probably checking out that red dress.
We were all checking that red dress out when she had that on.
Like that's a Matrix reference.
I'm like, he's got more situational awareness in that moment than the two of them do. They're walking along chatting. He's walking towards them, so he saw them, and I would imagine saw them walking towards him, not seeing him. So you move out of the way.
Did somebody say he was a pickpocket? Was he picking Sisko pocket?
I think probably would have to have pockets to have one picked.
Yeah. He was pickpocket.
You didn't see the rat? Oda was following him.
Yeah, and the start of the stuff I love, and Sisko has a great quote when he's talking to Fenna, and I feel like it kind of encapsulates the entire series. But I think he goes, one of the great things about the station is you never know what's going to happen next.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of the motto for the entire series, I think.
Yeah.
And the giggle. I have a thing for giggles of all kinds. If you get a good rolling giggle, it's one of my favorite sounds on the planet. I love you, Dad moment just absolutely melts me. And I just spent last weekend with my son when I was in New York. I stayed with him. We did a ton of sightseeing stuff all day. He was basically my squire / tour guide. He knows the subway system just so well, just off the back of his head already. And it was nice hanging out with him. He came up to top of Rockefeller Center with me, where I got this picture from, and it was very nice spending that much time with him. So then coming home after that and then watching that scene got me right in the feels. And I actually have a question for Cirroc about your Jake is talking to Sisko about, I want to meet her. Can I meet her? And Sisko says, you can't. She keeps disappearing on me. And you have the oddest facial expression right as the scene ends. Do you have any idea what that facial expression was about? I couldn't quite figure it out.
Yeah, I couldn't figure it out either. When I watched it, I was thinking, I was like, where did that come from? And I can only think the director gave me some something.
Yeah,
because I thought it was
Alexander Singer, I believe.
Looked a little forced, the extra expressions at the end of that. I thought so too. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I thought it was cute.
Everything he did was cute in this episode.
It was like, he was like, okay, what have you been drinking, Dad? That's what I thought of that book.
Yeah.
I think part of it was like, what does that even mean? Like, I was thinking that when he said it, like, what the hell does that mean? She's disappearing. Like, is she does she just not want to see you? Is she actually disappearing? So it didn't make sense.
Literally disappearing.
Well, that kind of makes sense. And having raised a teenage boy, the story about the lunchtime friend yakking. Yeah. I've heard many stories like that when my kid was that age.
So we got to run, but before we do, Cirroc, any final thoughts before we move into our series in review episode next week?
Yeah, quick final thoughts. One is Sally Richardson ended up marrying a guy named DeAndre Whitfield, who was an actor who I used to go out against when I would audition subsequently after leaving Deep Space Nine. So I know DeAndre pretty well, and it's cool that they ended up marrying Sally Richardson. The other thing I want to say is the actor who played Gideon is did one of my favorite Columbo episodes where he played a police commissioner. And that episode was called As a Friend Indeed, if you guys ever want to check it out. And the actor's name is Richard Kiley. The other thing I wanted to say is when Sally Richardson's character went into the turbo lift to leave, I noticed the plaque in the turbo lift that I hadn't seen before. And it's one of these kinds of plaques that Ira had made for.
Wow.
And I noticed it for the first time in the background on Deep Space Nine.
So
they have
cool.
one of these plaques, right? So you can get one of these yourself. I think Ira had them at the convention. That's where I picked it up.
Nice.
And so I noticed that. I thought you made some really good points about some of the biblical stuff. I do agree with that they make a lot of biblical references. Also like your point when you were talking about Eve, the opportunity that they missed about abusive relationships, because I do feel like this is an abusive relationship. And I think Gideon should not be put on such a pedestal because of how abusive he is to people. And then my final thought is they mentioned that they were going to reignite this star using proto matter. And I just thought, well, that's really cool because then you would have a proto star.
There it is. There it is, everybody.
And that's all I got to say about that.
Mic drop.
All right. And on that note, I think it was an F sharp. We got to run. Thank you, Carrie, Sue, Melissa, Scott, Eve, Chris, Faith, Justin, Tierney, Matt, Mai, Homer, and TJ, Jackson-Bey with his Enterprise uniform on. We will see you all next time. And until then, always remember the 7th rule.